DeFranco Movie Club. It's me, Jenny, aka ClassyLibrarian, and this week's movie was There Will Be Blood, starring Daniel Day-Lewis. And it's going to be very difficult to talk about this film in depth without giving spoilers, so my quick review for this film is it's definitely worth a watch. At some points it feels a bit like a slow-burning film, but it is definitely worth a watch. It's got some very interesting characters. It's a very, very good study on the subject of the American dream during the oil rush industry. And I found it really interesting. I really liked the way that the characters are developed and contradict themselves often. And it's really beautifully directed, really very simply directed, worth watching. Going into more depth with spoilers, I particularly like the way that the title resonated throughout this film. The idea of there will be blood is a threat. It's a vengeance threat. It's if this doesn't happen, there will be blood. And so it does work for this industry where it's if I don't get what I want, if I don't achieve my goals, there will be blood. So that's very, very appropriate to Daniel Day-Lewis's character, because he's so intent on his dream that he's willing to pass by pretty much anything to get where he wants to get. Whether or not it's in the first scene he breaks his leg, or whether or not it's later on where he's willing to hurt others to get to his goals. So I found that really interesting. Going on the same thing, There Will Be Blood, it's a kind of, as I said, vengeance. So there's a lot of characters, especially Eli, that Daniel Day-Lewis's character plays off against in a very, very kind of disjointed sort of way, where one of them will slight the other, and then that leads to a larger slight, which leads to humiliation, which leads to a greater humiliation, and it slowly builds up throughout the film until the final scene. So I really enjoyed their characters playing off each other. It's a bit of a grim story, but it's very interesting to watch those two very different characters with very different ethical views play off each other, both believing that they're completely in the right. Again, on the same lines of that as the Eli relationship, There Will Be Blood, there's a lot of references to the blood of Christ, there's a lot of references to the religion of this period, where it's a lot more part of the society than perhaps it is nowadays. There's a lot more influence of having a character who is basically, as far as I can tell, Daniel Day-Lewis's character is atheist. Having that character set into this very small religious community, and then having to deal with the fact that everyone believes in this very, very fixed set of rules, and himself trying to break free of those rules. It was very interesting to have a lot of stuff about the blood of Christ thrown in there as well. So that's another way that the title links in. And the one that I think is most important to particularly Daniel Day-Lewis's character is his relationship with his family. He obviously has this sort of subconscious belief that family is desperately important. He lets his brother into his house and into his life and tells him things that he wouldn't otherwise tell, I don't think, anyone else. Particularly after his son and he lose communication. And he has this sort of immediate bond with this guy because he believes him to be his own blood. And then when he finds out that he's not, he of course reacts. Similarly with his son, it's another hypocrisy of the character, because he does genuinely bond with this child, but in the end he says, no, you're not my blood, you're not my son. And both of them part on very bad terms, but again, it's all about blood, it's all about family. So even though he did relate to this kid a lot and look after him for most of his life, and I think had some great caring for him, he still said, no, you're not my son in the end, which I found really interesting and emotive at the end. So there's a lot of stuff that rolls into this film. As I said, the direction is really nice and simple in comparison to Requiem for a Dream. It's very single pans, long frames, so you can really get to know this sort of world and get to know these characters. I really like the way that the characters are very complex. You don't have the good guy, you don't have the bad guy. You have the guy that you're following, but you're not necessarily rooting for him most of the time. Yeah, and I really enjoyed the overall story, the overall theme, so definitely worth a watch. And yeah, that's about it really. I'm sorry I have a cold, I'm sorry this video is up late. And as I will say on all my videos this week, because I haven't said it in ages, you guys are awesome. I love you. I love all of the editors. I love everyone who comments, everyone who subscribes, everyone who likes, everyone who dislikes. You guys are all awesome. And I will see you next week, hopefully without a cold.